Good morning and Freilich and Chanukah. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We are on page 1270. Aleph, Ayin Beis, 1270. And we began the new paragraph. What we learned yesterday was, firstly, the conclusion of explaining the root of the Rishimu. You could see the Rebbe Rashab progressively elevates it higher and higher. First, that it has the Pnimius Ha'or, then it has Etzem Ha'or. Etzem Ha'or Mamish Hainu B'chinas Helem Ha'or Shalamayla, even higher than Pnimius Ha'or, and I explained what that meant with the example of faculties, with the example of the one who wants to build a home, how in his Etzem Ha'or, even though it's not yet an expression or revelation, lies the core so-called DNA of what he wants to build. Now he called Hu, that's higher than Shmai. And he compared that to the Oisius, the letters that are rooted in Yechidah Shebenefesh. The reason that the same idea can be explained, the same can be explained with different kalim or with different letters, is because it fits the so-called, design of what he calls Kvimuhus Etzem Nafshe. Not the design would not be the right word. According to the very core of the personality of the nefesh, so the letters are, in other words, the letters are not just superficial or arbitrary or surface expressions. They're rooted in the Etzem HaNefesh, and similarly, Kamoy Ken Yeshlemer, that Etzem HaReshimu is from the Helam Ha'or that's higher than Gili altogether. No, it's higher than Ur altogether. Higher than Gili altogether, sorry. And with Gam Yeshlemer, the final Yeshlemer at the end of the paragraph on page 1270 is that its root is in the Helam Ha'atzmi, which means it's not even Ur. It's rooted in the Etzem, which he calls Shmai Hakol Batzmusei, which he calls Yechelis, the Yechelis, the capacity, God's ability. And we're going to explain in a moment why he associates Rishimu more to Yechelis than Ur is associated with it, even though Ur also originates in Atzmus. But interesting, I just wanted to note, I was going to say yesterday, it slipped my mind. Before he said it's Etzem Ha'or, he says it's the level of Hu, that's Lamaila for Shmai, which means higher than Shmai. Hu, it says Actually Nivra Elam or Actually Netzel Elam, Hayahu Ushmai Bolvad. Hu and Shmai, he says Hu is higher than Shmai, that's the level, that's the Etzem Ha'or, not Pnimius Ha'or. Now he says it's a Shmai as it's encompassed in Atzmusei Baruch, in Atzmusei Mamish, which seems to suggest that this is higher than Hu. So there's a few ways you can explain it. The Chassidus explains Hu and Shmai Belvad can be explained on many levels. Hu and Shmai simply means him and his name. It means like him and his reflection. So it could refer to also after the Tzimtzum. It could refer to the Urs and levels before the Tzimtzum. So the first explanation he's saying Hu is Etzem Ha'or and Shmai is Pnimius Ha'or, or Ur in general. But when you go all the way to the top, you could say that Shmai, which means something that's not Atzmus Mamish, but it is some form of expression. You could say it's an expression like Ur, or you could say Shmai Kol Batzmusei, meaning Atzmusei then would be Hu, and then Shmai would be this Helam Ha'atzmi that he's referring to. So in that sense, it's not a contradiction, it's just different ways you explain Hu and Shmai, just to clarify that point. Okay, now, in the next paragraph, now he's taking it back. Remember, the whole theme is to come to explain the power of Kalim, of mitzvahs, of neshama as it comes into Kalim. How does that reach the highest levels of Etzem? So even though Simcha, we've explained that B'chol Meidecha, Mesiras Nefesh, and all the highest levels of Ava B'tainugim, Ava Rabba B'tainugim, all those levels are very high levels, but still the thing lacking that he said needs explanation is how can ultimately Kalim, which at the end of the day is some form of structure, how does that reach into the deepest levels of Etzem? And now we're beginning to get the answer. So now he comes back and says, Al Pizeh will understand in Eris and Kalim, which are rooted in the Reshima and the Kav, just as the Reshimu has an advantage and a quality over the Kav Gili, so too Kalim are rooted in a place that's higher than Eir and also have that advantage. So even though Eir is Gilui and Keli is Agbala and Helam, so when you look at an Eir and a Keli, the Eir is far more dominant. It's the energy, it's the Eir, it's the revelation. The Keli, what he calls is Agbala, it's a limit, it's a container that contains parameters, structure, and Helam. Nevertheless, the root of the containers, where do they come from? They come from a place that's higher than the Eir, Maila Harba Mesher Sha'ir. And then the Rebbe Rashab gives a proof. The Raya Lezeh. What's the Raya? Because the idea that Eir comes from Min Ha'atzmus, this is something that we can understand. It doesn't require a leap of understanding something that defies logic. It's true, like he says, even though Atzmus is beyond and negates and completely transcends Eir, God is not a moyer that's a source for light. He's beyond it. But once Eir exists, it makes total sense in our seichel because Eir is a reflection. Eir is an expression of the source. So God chooses to express himself. Does he need to? No. Is he completely beyond expression? Yes. But when he chooses to express himself, it makes total sense. Nevertheless, once there is a Metzias Sa'er, even though it's an Metzias, whereas Atzmus is higher than Metzias, but it's something that is understood and resonates, Munach, Leitzach, it settles, it's totally understood well in our Seichel. Metzias HaKelim and Atzmus, however, you have to say, compels us because Keli doesn't have anything that's similar to Elikus. It's a creation of Elikus, but it doesn't have that Eir quality that reflects its source. So when you see that coming from Atzmus, it tells us, he says, Muchrachim anu lezeh, shu yisbarach kol yachol. We have to, our Seichel tells us that now we have to go back to kol yachol, that God can do something that doesn't necessarily, a system, he can create something that's not similar to himself. That's not a reflection of himself. This natural understanding, it doesn't require faith. It's a logical understanding. That is a raya mucheches, he says, that's an absolute proof. A compelling proof that the root of Kalim is from Yechelis, because it's the only way to explain Kalim is to explain God's Yechelis, which is the idea of Kol Yachol. For the record, I've never seen anywhere in Chassidus that says Yechelis and Kol Yachol are one. It could be it's there and I haven't seen it, but here I see it very clearly pronounced that he associates Yechelis, God's capacity, with Kol Yachol, which means, of course, also means Yachol. He could do anything. So Kalim indicate on that element. So again, and then he brings Commercial Bar Le'il from the Maimer, the Pesach Maimer back in volume 2. Now, this does not say that Eir does not come from Atzmus, but 2 points as I made yesterday, and I'll just reiterate. Number one, Eir on its own doesn't compel Kol Yachol, because you could say God chooses to express himself. Keli compels it. Second thing is that once you know that the Keli compels Kol Yachol, then you understand also that God is completely beyond the Eir. Without Kelim, you'd never know. I mean, you could surmise, but you would not know in a direct way that Atzmus is completely beyond there. But when you see a Yesh created or a Keli that absolutely has no similarity to its source, and indeed, the Yesh says, I created myself, I don't feel a source. It says, Ein le'ila v'siba, like he explains in the Geras HaKedesh 20. That tells you that Atzmus is completely beyond, and therefore Eir is also, Atzmus is also completely beyond Eir. So you could surmise something, but the Keli definitely gives us a sense and understanding of Atzmus deeper than the Eir does. But it's not just understanding, it tells you a deeper dimension, so to speak, of Atzmus that Eir reveals. So though Eir is more revealing, Keli is more exposing, not revealing to us, but letting us know, making us aware, informing us of this power of Yechelis HaAtzmus. And that's what he meant before when he said Yechelis. So the Rishimu, which is the root of the Kelim, is rooted there, and the Kelim are rooted in the Shimu. And in that sense, the kelim, the root of the kelim, even though it's concealment and confinement, it's rooted in a much higher place than oir. That's what he said here in this section. So now we're going to continue reading inside, unless somebody wants to ask a question. Okay.
So that means that the kelim are higher than oil.
I didn't say that. The root of the kelim, the root of the kelim are higher. The root.
The root. But this is also not Atmos.
There's only one God. We say every day, Hashem Echad. There's only one God. But there's different so-called expressions of this God. So the root of the containers is rooted in Yechelis Atzmus, what he called Shmoi Hakol Batzmusei. Atzmus is always higher than anything. It's the Eibishter. Nothing is the Eibishter. The question is how deep within the Eibishter's so-called force powers each level reaches.
So he needed the kelim, and then he needed the oil. But first has to be the kelim.
I wouldn't use the word needed, because he doesn't use the word needed. He wanted.
Okay.
He wanted the kelim. He wants a full picture. To have an existence, you need to have kelim. You need to have oil. You need a guf, and you have a neshama. In language that we can relate to. Remember, neshama and guf are the best examples because it's something that's tangible we all can relate to. A soul needs a body, and a body needs a soul. So in a way, that's kelim and oir, or oir and kelim. In higher levels,
without the body, the soul could not fulfill the purpose.
Correct, and without kelim, the oir cannot fulfill its function. Right. But without oir, there's no gilui, and there's nothing happening. The keli is just a dormant, latent state, as we said. It's like a corpse. The neshama, like a tefillah below kavanah, it could guf below neshama.
Yeah, but this is what the Eibishter wants. He wants both.
He wants both.
But the tachlis hakavana, the lira b'tachtenim, is of course both. But the bottom line is it has to be beguf. It cannot be without oil, but it has to be.
But the guf without oil is equally problematic. I will always qualify that because he made oil too. This is not coming to tell us that we don't need oil. It's coming to tell us that kelim have a power that's rooted in a very high place that's higher than oil. Correct. Look, the fact is we need teirem. Dira leis bara b'tachtenim means that dira begoloi in tachtenim, in the kelim, in the gashmias, in the lowest level of yesh, but a dira in the yesh, and that requires avodah. And without avodah, you have a chetei tzadas, another chatoim, conceal the divine, and that's not the kavan. So I just want to make sure that the picture is complete here. Okay, good.
Thank you.
So now he continues. Ulechein, this is the line that begins a commissioner's bar le'il, a little less than around almost a half down the page. Ayin Aleph Ayin Reish 1270. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. Ulechein, and therefore, kol gili ha'er toli ba'keli dafke. That every gili of oir, called gili ha'oir, all gili of oir, or every gili of oir, is dependent dafka on the keli. And he's going to explain what that means. Like for example, be'evrei ha'adam lamata. You see, always coming back to find examples within us. Because without it, it becomes an abstract exercise that's not tangible and often just mechanical in many ways. Spiritually mechanics, but still. So he's giving an example. This is the Chiddush of Chassidus, B'psari Echza Laka, Evrei Ha'adam Lamata, the limbs or the organs of the person below. So he's giving an example of Evarim. Anurayim, in the limbs and organs of a person below, on Nurayim we see Shekol Chemer Yafsid Hatsura. Oy yesif keicha. Okay. Every matter causes an erosion or deterioration of the tzura, of the spirit within the matter, or the energy within it. Or it increases it and makes it stronger. So simply put, as a person, for example, ages, even though the keiches ha'adam comes from the nefesh, and the nefesh does not age, the soul doesn't age, and the faculties don't age, but the body, the keli, ages. And because it ages, we get weaker. We're unable to lift the same weight. We can't walk as fast. We can't do many things. Why? Because the chemer haguf, what he calls the chemer, is causing the tzura to be weakened. Now, again, tzura doesn't mean that as it is in its source. We're talking about as it is in its function. Just like you see an appliance wears down, and you can see it weakens its output, the chemer affects the tzura. It also the other way around. If a person, for example, exercises and works harder, they can actually draw more energy and be more energetic and more power. In other words, drawing more energy from the tzura. So it's either weakens or strengthens. The point he wants to make, of course, is that the keli affects the oil. But let's see, let's continue reading to see the whole picture here. The geroyin hatzura, and this weakening or diminishing, geroyin could be diminishing, is better than weakening, diminishment of the tzura. Remember, chemer and tzura literally means matter and shape. Like let's say chemer would be the raw clay, and the tzura would be the shape you turn it into. But it really also means a lot more than that. It can be translated as matter and energy, matter and spirit, matter and form. So the keli would be like the chemer is the so-called the body of it, and the tzura is the force within it. It's sometimes Rishama and Guf, but he's using chemer and tzura here because that's the language in the Rambam and Nevuchim and other places where this idea is discussed. So he says like this now. So now, the geroyin hatzura, this diminishing of this spirit or energy, v'aliyosa, v'teisvus kecha, or its growth, and its additional energy and strength, both extremes, either its diminishment or its strengthening. Hakol tole ba'achemer, she hakeli ala'er. It's all dependent on the chemer. It's all dependent on the matter, on the body, which is the container to the oil. In other words, the oil, you don't wake up one morning and suddenly the soul is giving you more energy. If your body is worked out and you exercise and you do other things, so the chemer draws more energy. If on the other hand you don't, or you could cause the chemer can be sluggish, so the energy will flow less into it. It's literally dependent on how the chemer behaves. And again, this is not affecting the soul directly in its source, but it's affecting the functionality. Like there's anything, any training, when you train a student and you educate a student, or you train a craftsperson, whether it's making glass, or carpentry, or art, or writing, this is exactly what you're doing. You're training the fingers, for example, when you see artists, or you see, for that matter, acrobats and athletes do all kinds of things that most of us can't do. They've trained their body to in a way that the body is now drawing and directing the energy that's with it. So every training is really, in essence, the chemer drawing into the tzura. And also the opposite would be, we could also damage or diminish, I should say, diminish or weaken the tzura. So everything is totally in the chemer she'ekeli ela oir. Sometimes Chassidus speaks about, well, no, fine, good. And now he's going to go further in the explanation, and he's going to give an exact explanation of the eye and the power of vision. So the eye is a physical keli, and the power of vision is a tzura sakoyach hariyah. They need to join together, because you can be you can have the power of vision, but if your keli is not there, like he's going to explain now, it's going to cause effect. Here we go. Tehine. Because now, chemer ha'ayin, the physical eye, we're talking about the very eye, if it gets injured or damaged or wounded, yafsid surah sariyah haruchnis, it will cause the surah, which is the spirit or the energy of seeing, it will cause it to be diminished. The Riyah Ruchnius. He's calling it Ruchnius because it's not the Gashmis Ayin. Chaymer Ayin is the physical container of a physical eye. Now we see, God forbid, if something injures the eye, whatever it may be, it will affect the koyach. It's not like, it's disconnected because the koyach hariyah will not be able to manifest quite the same way. You can get blurred. It could be whether it's cataracts or it's other things that cause the koyach to be yafsid, weakened or diminished. And when the physical container, this matter of the eye, and when you repair it and you improve it and you correct it more, in direct proportion, it causes an increase in the energy of the tzura sariyah ruchnis, in the ability to see. So when you repair the eye after, let's say, an injury or surgery or whatever it is, it directly affects the koyach hariyah. So you see here both sides, how the chaymer is affecting the tzura, both in the negative, it can weaken it, and it can strengthen it. And now he gives another example of the moyach, the mind, the brain. The chen ha-chaymer the moyach. And the same with the chaymer ha-moyach, which is the very stuff of our physical brain. So there's a brain. It's not just a spiritual entity called a mind and ideas. There's a physical brain. When it's better primed and better refined to receive the tzura, which is the tzura, the seichel, which is the energy of the intelligence and of the mind, that will bring and a strengthening and an increase and a power of more of the eira seichel, of the light of the seichel. And the opposite is also true. If there's any diminishment or injury or wound in chaymer hamoyach, in the physical brain, God forbid, chaz v'shalom, yafsid v'yigara eira seichel. The energy of the seichel, the functionality of your mind, of the person's mind, will be weakened, will be diminished and weakened. So, take I don't want to even mention a stroke or other brain injury, a concussion. So the physical chaymer is affecting the tzura of the oil. So chaymer and tzura are not synonymous with keli and oil, but they're very similar in concept. Chaymer and tzura is more conceptual. Keli and oil is more like the eye, the vessel of the eye and seeing, or the physical brain and the mind working. Okay, nimtza. So now he concludes, going back, this was all a muscle. So what is this? What do we derive from this? Nimtza, from this we discover, we find that ha'oyer totally about keli, that the oyer is dependent on the keli. It doesn't have its own ability to just manifest. It's dependent on how the keli is. The keli is more primed, the oyer flows better and more increasing and more improved, as we spoke. And if the keli is weakened or injured in some way, it diminishes that flow. Nimtza er tali ba keli dafke, specifically in the keli. Shebechasar na ever yichasar ha'er or yachsar ha'er yichasar ha'er. That when the keli is weakened in the aver, the limb is weakened, it will cause a diminishment in the energy. Ubetikuna yistaken. And the repair of the chaymer, when you fix it or improve it, and yistaken, you'll also repair the oyer. Okay, So now we're getting a very interesting sense of what Kalim accomplished. And he's going to explain the reason for this is because Kalim are rooted deeper than the Oyer. Because you can ask a question. Why doesn't the Oyer control the Keli? Why is the Keli controlling the Oyer? Because hypothetically, you could say, if the Oyer and Neshama wants to shine, it shines. And the Keli can do nothing about it. The Keli should simply be a transparent channel. And if the Oyer wants to shine, it shines. It doesn't want to shine, it doesn't shine. But you see and know the Oyer is dependent on the Keli. So, but we haven't finished it. He's going to go say some more. V'lo oid, he says, and furthermore, or moreover, and furthermore, even more, Elo, and not only that, but more, Elo, however, shagidul era seichel, that the growth of the energy of the mind, basically the mind power, v'hamidus, hapnimim, and the internal emotions. It could be a premium goes both on seichel and midas, because they're both internal faculties. For example, walking or talking is considered more of more chesenia because they're outer. But regardless, the inner energy of the mind, power of the mind, and emotions totally be gidul hayevarim. Now he's going further. It's dependent on the growth of these limbs, of these organs, of these physical organs. Till now, he was not talking about, he's talking more a direct impact. If the keli is healthy, it will cause the flow to be stronger. And if it's, God forbid, injured, it will limit the flow. Now he's saying that the growth of seichel and midas is actually dependent on the growth of a person's evarim. Shatinuk, daite cotton, mitzad katn samayach. A child, his das is an immature one because his mind is still small. In other words, it's very much dependent. It's not just that he has a large mind and it's not functioning yet. The physical being of the child is also physically small, and that causes also that it should be shatin mitzad katn samayach. So think of it this way: when the brain is very small, like in a child, it doesn't yet have. I mean, the keli is small, so it doesn't have yet the capacity to allow a deeper levels of gadlus hamoichenin. Shatinik daite kat mitzad katnus hamoich dafka, specifically because of his small brain. Dainu klei chemer hamoich, which means the container of the matter of the brain. Kol sheyigdal, sheyigodl. How do you pronounce this? Sheyigodl or sheyigdal? Okay, so and the more the container grows, the more that the physical keli of the mind grows, that will cause direct proportion of the ratio, direct proportion, the Eir Hatsura Sichlis, the energy of the spirit of Seichel, of the power of Seichel. And the same he's now going to say about Midas. And the same, in proportion to his growth in years, his chronological growth, will also cause the midas in his heart, his emotions, to grow. So in other words, it's not two tracks. It's not like the physical body grows here, and a separate issue is the growth of the faculties. They grow together. And as the physical body grows, that causes the mind and the emotions to also grow, develop, the surah. From this compels us to say that there's a root and a source to the chaymer, to the body, to the container, to the matter, that is higher than the root of the tzura, of the shape, of the spirit and the energy. To the point, not only is it greater, but it causes, it has the power to compel and I should say to draw the tzura in increased ways. Why does the keli have this power? Because the keli, its root, is higher than the root of the oir. Okay, that's one proof. Now the Rebbe Rashab is going to go to another proof, but I'll stop here if anybody wants to ask anything. I know you could ask the question. You could ask this question. Let me just say this. Why can't you say it's true? The oir does not have a power to just override the keli if the keli is damaged or injured or small and like by a child. So yes, the oir can't override it and force itself through. Just like if you have an appliance, you have a computer that's dying, you can't just force the energy of the computer to just ride through. I mean, the keli is critical. But why can't you argue? I'm just throwing out this question. Why can't you say that still doesn't necessarily mean the keli is higher than the oir? It simply means it's telling you that the oir cannot flow without a keli. It's like anything. If you have a broken glass or a broken cup, the water will spill out. And the same thing again, does that mean that the cup or the glass is higher and greater than a greater source than the oir? You could just say it needs it. Maybe they're equals. The oir comes from one track. It needs the keli because the Eibishter wants it to go into a keli. And that's why if the keli is not intact, the oir, the energy will be compromised. But what's the raya that is coming from a greater and higher place? That's a seemingly ostensible question you could ask him what the Rebbe Rashab just proved. So the answer that seems to be the answer that I would say is a few things. First of all, the fact of the matter is that, let's take the second part of this example with the child growing. Is it true to say that the mind of a newborn is in full strength, and the only problem is the container is small? Since the container is small, the child can't fully access this powerful mind. Or does the mind actually grow? I'm talking about in this one. I'm not talking about the mind in heaven or in the Etzem HaNeshama. We're talking about the mind as a functional entity. So from the child to adult, there clearly, it's not just like a cup of milk or a cup of water, where the cup is necessary to hold the water, but the cup doesn't necessarily draw the water. Here, the Evorim, he said, that's how he began, the Evorim actually draw the energy, or they can weaken that flow. So it's more than just containing it, which is also a part of it, but the most important part that it actually draws. And as the physical brain expands, so too the capacity to understand and develop and generate ideas also expands. So it's not just that the oir is intact and just waiting for the keli to grow. That's in that part of the example. Also, the first part of the example, when God forbid something injures the eye, yes, there's one part you could say that it's like it injures the eye, and you could say that it is a type of force that is like a broken cup. So the eye, the energy of seeing can't flow. But there's another aspect here. When you like say exercise any aver, you actually are drawing much more energy into the aver, into the organ, which would indicate that it's more than just, again, a cup that happens to be the container of energy. It's also drawing. In a cup, it's not that way. An intact cup doesn't draw more energy than a broken cup. The only thing it does is it holds the energy in there. But here we're talking about the Devarim actually draw the energy out. That's what he's saying here. That's an additional explanation on this point. Okay, then he's going to bring another raya. But if anybody has any questions, please. So now he continues. Another proof to what? To this, that kelim are rooted higher than oir. From what we see, the gami sheklei meiche cotton, that also a person that who's klei meiche cotton basogas muskolis. When a person is a smaller mind, meaning a less developed mind, a less not a great mind, a smaller mind, in understanding ideas. There's smarter people, there's people who are less smarter. If he will exert himself with his mind, dafke, if he exerts it with his mind, dafke, specifically that way, explicitly, yagia v'yove, he will arrive, he will reach and arrive, le'emek hamaskolis, to a depth of ideas, shelo yehoye be'erkei klal tchila, that was completely not accessible or proportionate to him, commensurate to him. So in other words, here you have a person who on his own, his mind has a certain capacity, but Yegiya, through effort, through exertion, and really struggling to understand something, it will cause him to be able to reach the depth of maskolos that initially this person was not capable of reaching. As you see, this is a thing we see. So actually, I already mentioned this example earlier, so I have to correct myself. Before, he was just speaking about how a healthy container or a damaged one affects the flow, not so much exercising it. I mentioned the word exercising. The really exercising is in this Eid Raya. Here he's talking about exercise that actually draws more. And maybe this is what adds the point that I made, that the kelim are not just containers, but they actually draw the energy, which proves that they're higher than the earth in a certain way. Before he was talking about more an intact container or a damaged one, and also the growth of a child into adult as the container grows. Now he's saying that we see that a person through effort, he reaches deeper hasagas that were not be'erkei klal. They weren't commensurate to him. You've seen this. We've all seen this. See someone who initially in school didn't seem that bright or brilliant, but then they work very hard and they reach places that are quite astounding. Yeah. So why is this the case? Says the Rebbe Rashab like this. For who? What's the dynamics here that are causing this to be this way? That's because of the additional and exertion and effort that he worked with, exerted with his so-called work, like a person who works through his, and with a type of strenuous effort, his very brain. Through that yigia, he's able to arrive, he reaches the keich ha-seichel yuli. He's able to go back to the source of seichel. Remember, his seichel as he was born, and his natural seichel is a certain amount. But now through the effort, the yigi, he's able to reach back into the root of seichel in the nefesh, seichel ha-yuli ha-atzmi, which causes him to be able to draw out a whole other dimension of air that he would not have drawn on its own. It's like I've mentioned a number of times, and here it's clear. Just like a person, let's say, naturally, you can run 6 miles without getting tired, fine, or 1 mile. But when you condition yourself and your kalim, you exercise, you condition, diet, hygiene, and so on, you end up running 2 miles without exertion. I mean, I shouldn't say that. The exertion caused you. What happened? That even though your natural muscles were this and this capacity, you were able to expand them to bring more strength. Same thing. Here he's giving the example with seichel. So Yegiya reaches deeper into the essence of this nefesh and the keich yuli atzmi. In Samach Vav, he gives an example that just makes it a little easier to understand when he talks about this. He says the difference between shalheves kshura begachelas and an even hachalomish. Difference between a hot white hot coal that has a flame hidden within the coal, you don't see it when it's white hot, and a flintstone. When you strike it, you can generate sparks, and the spark can light a fire. So the Rebbe Rashab says that there's two types of helam. Helam sheyeshna b'mitzias, helam she'ena b'mitzias. There's a concealment that exists, but you don't see it. So you don't need a lot of effort. All you need to do is fan the coals and they come alive. On the other hand, there's the helam she'ena b'mitzias, the helam that's not yet, doesn't have any existence yet. It's completely in the hiyulia atzmi. The only way to access it is striking it very hard. You have to take the flintstone and strike it against another stone. Very intent. He says that's yigia b'teira. That causes you to access sparks that are deeper than the helam sheyeshnim b'mitzias. So in other words, we have, as I mentioned yesterday, we have koiches gluyim, your revealed faculties. As I said, you have a natural ability, you can throw a stone for 100 feet. There's the concealed that has ability to do more, but it's just not revealed right now. You only use, let's say, half your energy. But there's more, you can use more energy and you can then throw for 200 feet. But then you can go and exercise your muscles. And though naturally you're only able to do 200 feet, throw 200 feet, you've developed strength to throw 300. What have you done? You've reached the Flintstone stage, so to speak. In other words, the coal, it's concealed, and all you have to do is fan it. The coal also, however, is a fire that you can touch. If you touch it, you're going to get burned, God forbid. The Flintstone, there's no flame in there. You can put the Flintstone in water, and it won't extinguish the sparks. You put a coal in water, even a hot white coal that is not obvious, is not visible, the flame, it will burn out. So you see that there are sparks that are there, but they're not revealed. There are sparks that are not, you can't even call them there. They need to be, you need the yigia to access them. And that's called the koyach yuli. That's like accessing the koyach haseichel yuli atzmi dafka. And now the Rebbe Rashab explains in the language of Chassidus. This is the mile of chayzer. Chayzer is called refracted light. Yashar is, let's say, sunlight is considered yashar. The sun is shining, direct beam of light. Chayzer is refractive or reflective light. That's not coming directly, it's coming on the bounce, on the rebound. The moon is considered chayzer because it's not its own light, it's reflecting the light of the sun. So when you shine light, let's say, you shine light, the sun shines light, that's yashar. Then it touches any object, let's say the moon or the earth, and you see a glow when you're looking at the earth or at the moon, that is called chayzer. But chayzer is not just a technical word. He's explaining here, it's what comes through yigia. So he says like this is the level of chayzer. Shemagia l'mayla b'chinas yashar. That reaches higher than yashar, than the direct light. And he's going to explain it with a famous example. Everyone knows this example. It reaches, why does it reach higher? Because the regular light is coming, the power of the source is very great. But here it has that element of the keli is responding and reflecting the rebounding light. The yigia that brings the light coming from our effort, not what you're naturally born. What you're naturally born with is yashar. Chayzer is what you create, you generate through your effort. Essentially, when you work with the keli. The essential idea between about tzaddikim and balei tshuva. A tzaddik is adam yashar helach. He follows what God wants him to do. He never wavers. A balei tshuva has wandered in places that were not what God wanted. Deliberate, not deliberate. It's not relevant now whether it's a tinuk shenishba or not. It's not a question of responsibility or blame, but he comes to the oyer through his effort from the so-called from the bottom up instead of from the top down. The Zehu Gamken, says the Rebbe Rashab, this is also the concept of Gamken inyan umatalmide yesem mekulam. That for my students, yesem mekulam, I learn most. When he was asked the Tana, where did you learn what you know? He said, I learned harbe mit Beis. I learned much from my teachers, and even more mechaverai from my friends, my colleagues. And for my students, yesem mekulam, I learned more than all. But your students are less than you. They're lower than you are. Your teachers are higher than you, but the teacher is yashar. And the Talmidai, when you teach the students and you have to bring it down to them, and they ask you questions and sharpen your presentation and ideas, that's through the hashpah, the transmission to the students, dafka through transmission to the student. It increases the seichel, the energy, the oyer, the kelim of the talmidim increase the seichel by the teacher. Ubefrat, and specifically, not just a regular student, but the Talmud hamachkim es Rabbi. So you could have a student who doesn't necessarily sharpen the mind of the teacher. It still increases in the teacher, but especially a student who's a sharp student, and he challenges and he causes the teacher to become wiser through his questions or through his challenge and so on. That makes it even. Who? What is that? What does this mean? This is all due to the maila, the quality of the recipient. Its root of the makabel is lamaila mashpia, is higher than the mashpia. Because how could a student that's lower than a teacher cause the teacher to go higher? So you have to say that the makabel, this, like we're speaking about the keli, actually his root is higher than that of the mashpia ulechein, and therefore al yedei makabel dafke is specifically through the recipient miseisef eir eitzla mashpia. It increases eir by the mashpia, by the transmitter. The Rabbi Rashab gives a source, the Ayin Beis, and delve into what's written about this. The Siddur, this is the Siddur of the Mittler Rebbe that he compiled all the Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe that he had heard on the Siddur, in the order of the prayer book. We are in the Siddur, Ba'adrush Sha'achar Aleinu, in the discourse that follows Aleinu after Shachris. So there's a mimer there. He says to look there, he explains this idea. So this is all the mashal. He gave, I count here 1, 2, 3, 4 mashalim at least. He gave the mashal of the evadim, whether they're injured or God forbid, or they're good and refined and they cause the error. He gave the mashal. He also explained it with the context of a child and an adult. As the kelim grow, the energy, the faculties grow. Then of the oid yeshlemer, he spoke about the oid raya. He said rather, oid raya is that when you exercise with yigia effort, that causes more intelligence to come in. Yigia chezer, and with that itself, he brought Hamidi Yeshem Bekulam, and then and concluded with the mile of the makabla of the mashpia. Okay, and the moral of all of this. What is the lesson? What do we learn from all these examples? Yuvan Lamaila, the Nimsham Kolzeh, the moral of all this will understand how it is above. The B'chinas HaKelim, the Eiris Elyenim Datzilis, in the level of the containers that contain the energies above in Atzilis, because we're talking about Lamaila, in the spiritual world. K'moy Chochma Moicha, like Chochma is the Oyer, wisdom, and Moyach is the Keli, the brain. Ubina Liba. Bina is the Oyer, and Liba is the container. This is in Pasach Aliyah, we say every Friday. So we'll understand the same, what we just said, that the Kalim are rooted higher than the air, and that's why they draw down the air in everything we just discussed and increase the air. The Alpha Pishal Kalim Magbilim Israel, that even though the containers contain and limit the flow of the air, that's what containers are. Like we said at the beginning of the paragraph, Hagbal V'Helam. Like we learned at length earlier, as it was explained at length earlier, the Eiru B'chinas Ayin, the Eir is a level of Ayin, of a very sublime, non-substantial entity. Keli B'chinas Yesh. And the Keli is a Yesh. It has an identity. It has presence. So in that sense, the Eir is higher than the Keli. The Keli is limiting the Eir. The Keli is bringing the Eir down into a much more limited flow. Nevertheless, Yesh Sheirish L'B'chinas HaKelim. There's a root to the containers. L'B'chinas HaKelim, That's much higher than the root of the Eiris. Ad, to the extent shemachmosam dafke, that due to the containers, yumshach teis the Eiris d'Atzilus will draw down abundant and additional increased energy in the energies of Atzilus. Top of page 1271. And why is this the case? V'hainu, and this means the fisha sheirish hakelim, because the root of the containers, whom b'chinas harishimu, is from the level of the rishimu, v'sheirish ha'eris he ma'akav, and the root of the energies are from the kav. And now he sums up what we said. The b'chlolis, hu b'chinas ha'ara levad. In general, the kav is only a reflection, mibchinas chitzeni is the Ein Sof, from the outer dimension of Ein Sof, as we learned before, like this, like the paintbrush. Habai that tzimtzum. Chitzeni is Ein Sof that comes through the tzimtzum. That's the kav. Aval rishimu, but the rishimu, he mibchinas muhuz va'atzmus, comes from the core and essence. The b'chinas primis se'er, k'meishu lifnei tzimtzum. From the inner dimension of air, the way it is pre-tzimtzum. And then he adds what he said at the top of last page. The gam, and additionally, the etzem nekudas harishima, the very core of the rishima itself, imchinas helam ha'er, is from a concealed state, a concealed air. The gam imchinas helam ha'atzmi, the Ein Sof. The two levels he spoke about before. The bottom of page 1269 comes from helam ha'er, etzem ha'er, and then even higher, Helama Atzmi, completely beyond Eir, where he says, Helama Atzmi, the Ein Sof canal. K'niz barlo, k'niz niskalil, as was explained earlier. Valkain, and because the Kalim come from that place, in contrast to the Eir that comes from the Kav, which is from the outer dimension, Alkain yesh b'koyach hakeli. That's why as the Keli has the power. It's in the power of the container, lahamshich teisvis eir ba'eris, to draw down an abundance, an increased level of energies. Ba'eris, in the eris of Atzilus, b'chinas eir primi ba'atzmi, an inner and core dimension of eir. That the eir itself, like the teacher, is higher than the student, but the student can draw down a much deeper primi and atzmi that the eir itself did not have initially, at least not in a revealed way. Okay. So we're going to stop here at the top of this paragraph, but I just want to say one or two things. Then I'll take some questions if you wish. The few things I wanted to say was, you see from here, the next paragraph, he's going to start going back to Simcha Shal Mitzvah, but you can see here, remember the language about Gan Eden? That Gan Eden on its own is a certain level of Tainug Atzmi, by nature. That's the way God created it. But then there's Yizbu'u Atze Havaya. The word Svia, sated, that the trees of Havaya and Gan Eden get sated through our Avodah. That this, what do we add into Gan Eden through the Avdal L'Shamra? We add the Eir Primi and Atzmi through our Avodah. So you're seeing now how all this is going to come together, both explaining how Kalim allow us to reach into the Etzem. So the mitzvahs we do with the Kalim, and the neshamas, even though they're kalim, they have the ability to reach. Simcha Shal Mitzvah and all the other aspects of Avodah expand the containers and ishtalshus as much as possible. But we'll also learn how we draw more energy than Gan Eden has on its own, even though Gan Eden is also higher than the rest of the Olamis on its own, as we learned earlier. So all this is going to come back as he ties everything together. So I'll stop here at the top. The paragraph on top of page 1271. But if there are any, please, if there are any questions, let's go.